Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Weppett and I'm here to help you sharpen your masculine edge. And in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to take mastery over your primal emotional energies. To accomplish this, your rational faculty must become the king, the alpha force of your internal jungle. If done correctly, your primal energies will submit to and support your rational faculties. If done incorrectly or not at all, then basically what you're going to have is inner conflict between what you know is good versus what you feel like you want to do. I think most people today are caught in this internal war between rationality and emotionality, and I want to offer you a new perspective on how to create harmony and integration. Welcome back, everybody. I took some time off for the holidays, and it was a nice little break for me, but for you guys, it meant a little while without a new video. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm back now, and I'm energized, and I'm really excited to get things back on the road. I'm really excited for this video because it's a little bit different than what I've done in the past. It's actually probably more of kind of like a podcast or a lecture. It's going to be a little bit longer, but it's on a topic that I'm super excited about. It's one that I've been developing for a while and have had kind of breakthroughs around, and is actually probably going to serve as a central point of my new course that I've been working on. But I figured before doing that, it's always good to try and get a concept out first and get some feedback on it, see what people think of it, and see if it's really, as good and powerful as I think it is. At the core, what I'm offering you in this video is a new perspective, hopefully a groundbreaking perspective, on how to interact with yourself, how to interact with this entity that we call you, okay? And before I get into the specifics, let's set a little context here, okay? And maybe you'll understand why I think this is so important. So at the lowest level of self-interaction, I would say you have the person who doesn't really interact with themselves at all, okay? They are the person who is just pretty much in an emotional, reactive autopilot all the time, okay? And we've talked on this channel about how that doesn't really work out too well. It doesn't lead to a great life. And so what most people do, I think, when they recognize, wow, I've been on autopilot and it's really not working out well, they start looking inward and they begin true self-interaction. And the first way that I think people do this is that they look inside and they see all these moving pieces. They see thoughts, they see emotions, they see desires, they see, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things. And this leads to a kind of self-interaction where you view yourself as a individual of pieces, meaning like you view yourself as this one big main unit who's comprised of all these separate little pieces. And so self-development then, it requires or implies this sort of mechanics mindset, or you could think of it as like an engineering mindset to self-development, where it's like, okay, if something's broken, I just need to, look under the hood and, fix it, kind of like how you would fix a car. If you can understand how these pieces work inside of yourself, which you can with some study and some, self-reflection, then you can apply this mechanics mindset and get pretty good results. You can, fix a lot of stuff up and really make your life a lot better. And this is the mentality that I've been in for a long time. And, like I said, it can be very effective. I got so good at looking underneath my own hood that other people started to pay me to help look underneath their hood and help them fix their problems. I've started to run into a problem with this perspective, this mechanics mindset, this individual of parts form of self-interaction. And the big issue is that it's complicated. As you start getting into the deeper issues that people wrestle with, like addictions and depression and self-image and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes down to how do I practically change this? How do I actually create a change? There's a lot of stuff to keep track of, even if you know it all or know a lot of it. You spend a lot of time studying it, and this is what I've done, and it's still even complex for me. And then when I was writing or working on my new course, I'm really trying to help give people a deep insight into these things, and it started to feel like I was trying to sell people a textbook. Like I was trying to sell people some sort of internal engineering degree. And this is great if you're as strangely passionate about this kind of stuff as I am, but I want this to be useful to the average person. And from this It's like, look at it this way. All right, why do most people take their car to a mechanic instead of learning how to fix it themselves? Because they don't really have any interest in it. It's just not naturally exciting to them. They don't want to have to, read a bunch of textbooks and take a lot of courses or whatever to get their car running. They just want the thing running, right? So selling people a mechanic's textbook for internal work, I just don't think that's the best move if I'm trying to reach a lot of people. Additionally, it would just get complex and less efficient as you deal with bigger and bigger problems. So that's what I'm offering here, is a new perspective, stepping out of this mechanics mindset where you view yourself as like an individual with a bunch of different pieces and you just got to go in there and fix the pieces. Instead, I think a better way to look at yourself now is to actually look at yourself as two separate entities existing in a connected manner inside of this whole piece we call you, okay? So it's learning how to look at yourself as two people inside of one person. So instead of having to keep track of a million different pieces, you have to keep track of two pieces. And these pieces are actually people. And so what ends up happening, instead of this engineering mindset, you have a relationship mindset. Instead of a mechanic, you're talking about leadership and following and trust. And I think that this is important because it engages a different kind of thinking. Instead of just, raw mechanical, thinking like that, it's more relational and social, which I think is useful, but you'll see why in a second. So the two selves that create you are what I would call your primal self and your terminal self. And your primal self, if you wanted to be overly simplistic, you could call that your emotional self. And you could call your terminal self your rational self. But I don't like those terms. I don't like them because that's actually just reverting to looking at it as separate pieces of, arbitrary pieces almost. And they're not really pieces it's not really your rational self and your emotional self, because this primal mind or emotional mind, it actually has its own form of rationality to it, and you can understand it. And, this terminal or rational part, it actually has kind of its own feelings and emotions too. So, it's not accurate to say that they're totally distinct. They're more like fully functioning things with different powers and motivations, and they're trying to both help you, but they go about it in different ways. And so the job then is to figure out how to get them coordinated and working together. And I think the terminology is important here because, much of the deeper work that someone has to do, it's very dependent on nuance and accuracy, okay? And if you're using inaccurate terms or inaccurate mindsets to begin with, that can affect everything and it can really hold you back a lot. And that's why I'm being kind of anal here about this sort of stuff. So let's get into these two parts and I'll explain what they are, how they work, and then we'll start getting into the even more interesting stuff. So, all right, let's start with the primal self. All right, your primal self, you can think of it kind of like as your animal self. And in a way, I don't even like the term animal because that implies that it's like a less human part of you, but that's not the case. It's very much a human part of you, and perhaps even more than half of your humanity. But it's the part that controls your instincts, your emotional drives, your sexual desires, your feelings, okay? It's also responsible for, I would argue, most of your unconscious physical processes. Basically, it's every part of you that you cannot consciously control, all right? This is a part of your primal self. And very often you can observe your primal self. You can see it in action. You can see what it's doing, what it's feeling, and that sort of thing, but you can't directly control it. Like, you can't control the fact that you have an emotion in the first place, but you can kind of control the way that you respond to it, etc. Neurologically, I would say this primal part of you, it's, associated with your limbic system and kind of your brain stem. And so if I was going to be creating a sci-fi fantasy novel, and I was going to use it as an allegory for internal work, I would probably represent the primal mind as like this half dragon, half monkey beast. Okay. And the reason for that is because it's like, a combination of your reptile brain and your mammalian brain kind of mixed together. And this half dragon, half monkey beast, it's kind of magical because it contains all of the ability to create your neurochemicals that give life essence and meaning and purpose and sensation and all that kind of stuff. And it really has a personality of its own. I think everybody's primal self has its own sort of unique characteristic. It's like any other sort of, pet or animal or anything like that. It's got its own qualities. It can be incredibly fearsome. It can be very anxious and afraid. It can be, soft and cuddly. It can be brave, and it can be totally cowardly and terrible. A lot of it really depends on how it's treated. And one of the coolest parts about this whole dual mind perspective I'm offering you here is getting to know what your primal self looks like and is. Because the more you get to know it, the more it reveals itself to you, and you realize how wonderful and interesting of a creature you really are. And beyond the more obvious associations with this term primal, I like that word because by definition, primal means kind of like initial or original. And the way that I view the flow of energy inside of you, in your psyche, is that it originates with your primal mind. Your primal mind, it like radiates out your desires, your drives, your raw hungers and stuff. They radiate out of your primal mind, but they don't necessarily end there, right? And this is kind of the issue. Your primal mind is incredibly powerful in terms of its raw emotional force, but it's not incredibly smart. It's kind of got this naive innocence to it because it can't think rationally. It just is what it is. And this is why and some people, they refer to this as your inner child. And I did for a while myself. Even my last course, I talk about like this inner child, but I don't really think that's actually super accurate anymore, mostly because of the tremendously potent sexual energies that can come from this part of yourself, as well as the very dark and violent energies that can come from this part of yourself. Don't really lend to this childlike image. It's more of like, I think, a mythical beast. But this mythical beast, it can't think super great. And so often it ends up just chasing its own tail, chasing its most immediate desires, and failing to really produce satisfaction in itself and reaching its own potential, because it will limit itself consistently. It's not smart enough to really thrive in this modern world on its own. So here is where the other part steps in. This is what I would call your terminal mind. And your terminal mind, if your energy starts with your primal mind, then it ends with your terminal mind. Neurologically, your terminal mind is associated with kind of, this frontal cortex, this part that's responsible for reasoning, planning, speaking, that kind of stuff. You can think of your terminal mind as your ego consciousness. This is the part that you most easily associate with as being you. This is the part that you feel like is you. So it's like, if you can observe your primal mind, your terminal mind is the observer. If I was going to go back to that sci-fi fantasy novel thing, the primal mind would be this dragon monkey, okay, this magical dragon monkey, and then the terminal mind would be kind of like a technological alien, all right? And I would say it's an alien because if you look at our terminal mind or our rational mind and intellectual capability compared to everything else that we know of that's alive, it's like super foreign. Like, we're way smarter than anything else on this planet as far as we can tell. Like, in a paradigmatic, I don't even know what the right word would be, next level kind of way. It would be a really, like, it's a huge jump. So that's why it's kind of like, it's almost like an alien thing that we have inside of us that's very unique. And it's technological because, well, one, it uses technology, but two, it kind of runs on software, and that's what it is. It's like this operating system that will develop new software and install it and run it. And that's like what our skills are. Like, it can run long division software, it can run social software, it can run whatever kind of skill or ability or thing you want to do. It relies on your terminal mind to get a lot of that stuff done. And this is a tiny little alien compared to this big, massive, primal mind. Okay, like it's in a straight up fight, or maybe in a protracted fight, okay, I would say that the primal mind's going to win. It's just got way more emotional power, and people will ultimately end up acting on their emotions if they're not corrected. But your terminal self does have some power. It's got a leash, okay, and this is your willpower. And to some extent, it's like, this little dude riding on top of this massive beast, and it can steer it and direct it if it, flexes that power. And we've talked about willpower and stuff. We'll say a little bit more about it later, but it's important to point out that your terminal mind does have, this ability to influence your primal mind. If that word terminal sounds kind of weird to you, the reason I picked it is for a couple of things, is that it's the end point. Terminal, by definition, means like this end point or final point. And if you think about like a train terminal, that's where all the trains come in, or airplane terminal, airport terminal. Like it's all the stuff comes in and gets routed somewhere else. And that's what our terminal mind does. It takes all these inputs, especially from our primal mind and from our senses, and tries to figure out the best way to go forward. It's like, a computer terminal. It's the access point to control the rest of the system. So that's what it's supposed to be like. This terminal mind's supposed to be this big sort of, overall controller. So let's step back for a second, all right? Within this perspective that I'm talking about here, you've got this tiny little intelligent alien soul trapped inside your body with this powerful primal dragon monkey spirit. And if you can get past how weird of a sentence that is, then you can actually see your life unfolding as an epic drama between these two forces. Your primal mind gives you gut instinct, raw desire, emotion, sensation, all that kind of stuff. And then your terminal mind should provide you with kind of rationality, prioritization, mindset, direction. And you can see how these two are made to fit together like, peanut butter and jelly. It's kind of perfect. Your primal mind should be your engine, and then your terminal mind should be your steering wheel. And together, you can hopefully create a productive and healthy life. But sadly, for I think most people, most of the time, their primal and terminal selves are waging war against each other, constantly jockeying for control over their actions. And when there's disharmony between your primal and terminal selves, at best you're dealing with kind of inner conflict, but at worst you're really dealing with self-sabotage and self-destruction. And obviously that's not a good place to be. So here's why I think this problem between these two parts tends to exist. The big issue is that it takes a while for these parts to fully mature within you, to fully develop. And as you're going through this maturation process, it's up to your parents, your family, and society to kind of stand in and guide and help develop these parts. And what ultimately tends to happen, I think, is that you get bad desires and conditioning implanted into your primal mind, and you get bad software implanted into your terminal mind. And so like there's clashes, they become incompatible systems that don't work together well. So, for example, I think the primal self of most modern men reaches adulthood as a mess, really. Like he reaches adulthood with his sexual energy addicted to porn, being, funneled literally and metaphorically into the sewer with porn and masturbation addiction and that kind of stuff. He's addicted to video games and Facebook. That's how he gets his sense of status and worth. And, he alternates between feeling anxious, apathetic, and angry. That's a mess of a dragon monkey, right? That's not a good place to be. And then imagine, all right, so imagine for a second that someone plops this, half crazed, addicted, moody dragon monkey on your front porch and says, hey, your success in life and society is dependent upon how well you can get that thing to behave according to, the rules for successful social interaction. It's like, crap, how am I going to get that to behave that way? Well, it's very difficult. And that is the position of your terminal mind. That is the position of the terminal mind of the average dude when he reaches adulthood. He has this mess of a primal mind, and his terminal mind has no idea how to deal with it because no one ever taught him that thing even exists or, what to do to deal with it. So without real clarity on how to handle this situation, I think most people, they kind of just do their best. But, what that tends to look like is this alternation between repression and compulsion. So in the repression stage, your little terminal alien will yell angrily and slam on that leash, just keeps yanking on that leash furiously, and maybe even trying to throw that primal self into a cage and, really just try to enforce order. And this is those times where you basically just, squash or kill your feelings. You repress them and you just try and beat them down because they're being so unhelpful and misaligned that you just feel like you gotta lock them up and, throw away the key. And so that's this repressive stage. And that doesn't really work, right? That doesn't really work. So what happens is eventually that beast breaks free. And what's it do? It eats your freaking alien. It literally, your emotions will come out and then consume your rational mind. And when it does that, then the beast runs the show. And this is what happens whenever you get overcome by an emotion or an urge or something like that. This is what addicts deal with all the time. Their primal self just like swallows up their rational faculties, and then they just kind of, chase their appetites. And I think most people kind of settle into this sort of pseudo state of stasis where, they yank on their own leash hard enough to dodge like the biggest issues. But then they just settle into sedating their primal self so that it can't feel how unhappy it is. And this is the person who, maybe they're getting by, but then they just have to consistently numb their brain with porn or video games or drugs or whatever so that they can continue to, function. And, the whole goal is to just not feel bad and to hopefully just minimize their pain and, escape. That's what a lot of it is. It's just like settling into this pattern of escapism. And, as long as you have the means to do that, then a lot of people do, until, sometimes it just gets way too unbearable like that, because you can only kid yourself for so long, right? So my big point here is that things don't have to be this way, all right? You don't have to be at conflict within yourself like this all the time. In fact, these two parts can absolutely work in a really pretty impressive sort of harmony. What this looks like is a relationship of reciprocal service, where your terminal mind serves the good of your primal mind, and then your primal mind returns the favor. It's like the difference between having a well-trained dog as part of the family and, having a poorly trained dog, okay? It's kind of like, imagine if you were going for a walk with a poorly trained dog. What's it doing? It's constantly pulling on the leash, trying to go wherever it wants to go. This is like your primal mind, just, trying to go whatever way, chase its tail, do whatever the heck it wants. And your terminal mind always got to like yank that leash, and it's just getting anywhere is a hassle, and it's not it's right? And there's no peace in a family with a very poorly behaved dog. It's going to poop everywhere. It's going to eat up all the furniture and all that kind of stuff. It's not good. But, a well-trained dog can be a total joy, a total member of the family, right? It can take commands without question. And it can even more than that, it can start anticipating what you want. It'll work for you automatically. Maybe it will, protect your house. Maybe it'll bring you the paper. Maybe it will, alert, it'll just come up and ask for belly rubs when it can tell you're stressed, like whatever it is, like this primal part, it can actually start working for you even without direction. And wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if your emotional elements worked toward your ends? So a more practical example would be, I work with guys trying to quit porn all the time, and so for them, their primal self, it's like a dog that sees a squirrel and just like locks onto it and tries to chase after it and bust down the fence and go after it like that. And you have to just like at first use so much effort to just hold that leash and keep it back. But if you train that part properly, eventually maybe it'll see the squirrel, but it'll be too busy having a blast herding sheep or metaphorically whatever other task you want your primal mind occupied with. It'll be engaged in serving you rather than chasing stuff that has no benefit to you. And there's another reason why I bring up this dog example, and it leads into the next layer of this conversation. And it's because dogs are they're pack animals, right? And that's similar to primates. Primates are, pack social animals, and we are primates, especially our primal self is very much similar to apes. That's just the way we're wired. And it's in these kind of social creatures that there is a alpha beta dynamic often, where you have this alpha leader who kind of leads the pack, and then you got the rest are the betas, the followers, the ones that kind of defer to that alpha force and support them. And there's this kind of harmony between them. The alpha, if it's good, it will protect and lead, and then the other parts will follow and support and give respect, that sort of thing. And this is true with dogs, right? If you look into any dog training stuff, what you find out is that a lot of poorly behaved dogs, the reason why they're poorly behaved is because they think they're the alpha. And this is natural. If a dog doesn't feel like you are a good leader, if it doesn't feel like you are the leader, then it will become the leader, because dogs feel unsafe if there's no alpha. Because they're pack animals. They need there to be an alpha. There needs to be a leader. And humans are the same, especially their primal part. And if your primal part feels like your terminal self is not being the leader, then your primal self will be the leader. It's kind of like if your rational faculties aren't going to take charge, well, then your emotional faculties will, so that at least there is some direction and there's some kind of leadership going on, right? But as we said, primal self isn't really too good at that kind of stuff. It can offer intuition in areas where it's been very well trained, and gut feeling in other areas, but it can't handle the responsibilities of complex decision making, especially not in this complicated modern world that we live in. So the question becomes, how do we get our terminal self to become this powerful and good internal alpha force to lead our primal selves? Well, probably the first step is to cut out all the stuff that does the opposite of that. Because, here's the thing, our primal self needs to trust our terminal selves. It needs to believe that it's worth following, okay? But sadly, most of our terminal selves have behaved in such a way only to earn distrust, okay? Like think about it. How many times have you been, emotionally lost internally or upset, and your rational component has just completely abandoned your emotional self? You basically just check out and you let yourself wallow in some kind of negative emotional state. Or how many times has that you found yourself in a negative emotional state and you literally actively worked to shut that part up, just to be like, shut up, you're stupid. And you can do it with drugs, you could do it with negative self-talk, you can do it with porn and other kinds of escapism. But basically you're like, I don't care what you have to say, you just need to stop saying it. That's terrible inner leadership, right? It's also, terrible inner leadership when you let that primal self act in ways that are bad. It's like, you see your dog like going to, jump up on the stove and the stove's on. He's going to get burned, but you're lazy and you let the dog do that and it gets burned, and, that's bad leadership. When I started to reflect on this stuff, I started to look at, on a day-to-day basis, how good of a leader am I to my primal self? And even after doing a lot of, personal development, I had to be like, dang, I fail a lot every single day. I'll just completely check out and refuse to show up in the moments that my primal self wants leadership more than anything. And, that's why, it's not working for me all the time. That's why my primal self is very resistant and puts up a lot of, emotional barriers and blocks and drags its feet all the time, because it doesn't trust the commands it's being given. It doesn't trust the person that's leading it. And seeing that was very sobering to me. So I recommend you taking inventory on that too. Where do you check out as a leader to yourself? Where do you allow your emotions to run the show because you can't be bothered to show up in a better way? So the key thing here to focus on is that if you want your terminal mind to be the alpha king ruler of your inner jungle, then it isn't your job to defeat your primal self. Okay, you don't need to beat it down. You basically need to prove that you can care for it better than it can care for itself. If you consistently prove that your terminal mind is a better leader than your primal mind, then your primal mind will be like, hey, crap, things are way better when you're running the show, so, take the lead, I'll follow. And the question becomes, how do you do this, right? Well, my new course is going to examine all of that stuff in, extreme detail, but I'll give you the big pieces here so you can really get started playing around with this. And this is not crazy stuff. It's really just about being a good leader. And so, that's what we're looking at here, right? So the first part of being a good leader, I think, is to be understanding. You need to understand the people that you lead. And so your terminal self, it needs to understand what your primal self needs. And it needs to be able to distinguish those needs from wants, right? You need to be able to listen to what it's aching for and sort through, okay, yeah, you actually do need that for sure. And no, you don't actually need that. You need this instead. Okay. And you do this through self-talk. All right. You have to learn how to listen to your primal self and what it's saying to you. And this is a skill I call translation. This is where you give your feelings words, because your primal self isn't smart enough to talk, plain and simple. So you got to, let your terminal mind translate. You got to translate sensation into words. All right. And this is a skill that's a little difficult at first. I remember it was a little tough when I first started doing it, but it gets to the point where you can, do it in real time, and you can literally have a conversation with yourself. And since I've had this kind of shift in perspective, my self conversations have literally become real conversations with two sides speaking, with actual, jokes and arguments. And it's really kind of weird. I don't think I'm going crazy, but, maybe I am. I don't know. It is making my life better though. But, it's also important that when you're listening and understanding, you maintain this critical attitude, because, your emotions can get a little bit silly at times and a little bit distorted. And so journaling or working with a coach or a therapist, they can definitely, facilitate this process. So a leader, they have to listen and understand, but they also need to speak. Okay. And this might even be more important. Your terminal mind has to speak truth into your emotions. This is its kind of main job. It's got to tell the truth, all right? Because your primal mind, all it knows is what it feels. That's all it knows. It doesn't know anything else. And so if no one else speaks up, then you're just going to go off of what you feel. And how many times how many times have you been lost or confused or upset or impulsive and did something that wasn't great for yourself because you didn't speak up rationally? You didn't step up and say, okay, well, this is actually true here. This is what's really good. It's like you need your terminal self to step in and be like, hey, I know you want to, play video games and smoke pot right now, but really you need to do those tax forms that you've been putting off for a while. It's actually going to make you feel way better. You're not even going to need that other stuff later. You're just going to be really happy that it's done. And it's simple. Just speak the truth. And guess what? Your emotional mind has to respond to it. It has to look at it. And it might be a little bit sour about it at first, but as it gets used to listening and hearing the truth, it starts to adapt itself to the truth. And it stops trying to live in strange fantasy worlds. But what happens when you don't know the truth? What happens when you don't know what to say? I think this is a place where a lot of us abandon our own self-leadership. And this is actually the time you need it most, all right? And so what this looks like, leadership very often is not the person who knows the answers. It's the person that takes responsibility for finding the answers. And this is really important here. Responsibility is huge, and willing to take responsibility before you can even necessarily say you know how to handle it. So it's like, life sends you uncertainty and confusion all the time. And your terminal mind needs to step up and be like, hey, don't worry, primal mind. I see you're freaking out over there, but guess what? I'm here for you. And I don't know what the answer is right now, but I've got some ideas of how I could maybe get some more information, maybe make some better decisions about this. But in the meantime, let's not freak out. Let's not fret or worry or whatever. Let's instead just do the things that we know we got to take care of. And I'll be working on this problem on the side. Okay. Or however you want to phrase it, but something like that's going to happen. That's what a leader is. They're willing to take that responsibility. And if you screw up, you got to take responsibility for that. It was really strange and insightful to me when I was having a conversation with myself in this vein. And I realized my primal self was just really pissed at my terminal self for not keeping its promises. Like I told myself I was going to do this and this, and then I didn't show up. meaning my terminal ego didn't show up to, give the command. And, I was like, dang, bro, you're right. I totally screwed up. That's on me. And there's an internal accountability that can be had that I thought was only actually possible if you're working with another person like a coach or an accountability partner. I think you can actually get this stuff internally when you learn how to work with yourself on this level. And the last piece on leadership that I would look at here is that you need to be assertive, okay? And people maybe overestimate this point in the self-development sphere, especially on the masculine side of the self-development sphere. They talk about learning how to dominate, okay? And there is definitely a place for a leader to know how to be dominant. In fact, they must learn how to almost exude dominance, but you don't want to be just combative. Like I said, you're not trying to kill your primal self or beat it into submission, but your primal self will absolutely test you. And sometimes it's straight up corrupted and infected by something. Like this is like what goes on in the case of an addiction. And your terminal mind needs to be willing to fight, and it needs to be willing to win. It has to claim victory, and it has to be sometimes brutal with your terminal or your primal mind if necessary. But it's got to be kind of a loving brutality where it's like, hey, I'm going to beat you up, but it's only because I really care about you. And this is willpower training here, right? You got to know how to flex. And I've talked about that and, the challenger mindset and all kinds of stuff like that in my previous videos. So you can check that out. But it's important to know this stuff. And if you want kind of a model about this, check out, hilariously enough, Cesar Millan. All right. He's the dog whisperer. The way that he gives the dog, like a misbehaving dog, a little just gives a little jab. That's the calm assertive, he talks about. If you want to see an even funnier example, watch the South Park episode where Cesar Millan trains Cartman into being a good kid like this. This is kind of what you have to do with your primal self. Don't take shit from people, especially from yourself. So I'm going to wrap things up here with a final point. Okay, I think a person's deepest wounds that causes them to be split internally and filled with conflict are the wounds of abandonment and rejection. And I think they exist deep in these selves that I talk about. And ultimately, what I think more than anything is that your primal self wants to know that there's one person in the whole universe that it can always count on to be on their side and to be their ally. And the only person that can be is your terminal self in an unconditional manner. And so be that for yourself. Be your own companion. And, you'll never really be alone from that place. And, developing this whole healthy inner alpha kind of thing, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take trial, error, reflection, and that's good. Go on a journey. This is a pretty magical journey. And the more you build this internal relationship, the more amazed that you're going to be at what you find, because your primal self will open and reveal more and more of kind of this inner essence that you maybe didn't even know you had. And you're going to find out you're far more interesting and wonderful. Individuals are far more beautiful than maybe you could tell at first glance. And you just kind of got to learn how to get yourself to open up so that you can see it. Well, okay, that's it. I've been talking for a long time now, and hopefully, you stuck with me and you found this stuff useful. If you did, please subscribe, all that annoying stuff that YouTubers have to say at the end of their videos. But until next time, stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.